Hello there everyone, my name is David Luchford and welcome to lesson 21 of my Ancient Greek course. Lesson 21 is titled The Third Declension Part 1, and that is because today we shall be learning about the third declension, that is the third and final group of nouns which change their endings in a similar way. But I say Part 1 because the third declension does have the greatest number of subgroups out of the three declensions. So I am going to be covering it in parts. And today we are going to be focusing on 3A nouns and 3B nouns. However, we are also going to learn some very useful information about the third declension in general first. But before we do that, I want us to take a look at my virtual set of shelves. Oh my goodness. These shelves are almost full. We can see that Mike, the marvellous, magnificent Mike, has bought 5 virtual amphorae. So he now owns the record for the greatest number of amphorae purchased. And his 5 amphorae have taken up the entire second shelf. So Mike, I wish to say thank you very much for your incredible generosity and for supporting the channel. Your support will forever be seen on this set of shelves. And so will the support of AF. You can see that AF has bought me 3 virtual amphorae, for which I am very grateful. So AF, I don't know what AF stands for, but right now it stands for astounding and fabulous. Because AF, you are an astounding and fabulous person. Thank you very much for your support. And finally, we have the amphora of the fantastic Florence. Thank you very much for your support, Florence. I greatly appreciate it. And thank you once again to all of my supporters. I haven't forgotten about you, Gina and KW. But ladies and gentlemen, you can see that there is still a space left next to the fantastic Florence's amphora, and there are also spaces left on the bottom shelf. The bottom shelf is in fact completely empty right now. So, if you would like to add a virtual amphora or virtual amphorae to my virtual set of shelves, then you can do so by going to www.buymeacoffee.com/learnancientgreek. And one other thing is, nobody has, as of yet, asked for their amphora or amphorae to be customized. But please remember, if you want me to customize your amphora in some way, such as by adding a red glow to it, or giving it a pink tint, then you can request that in your message and I shall see what I can do. But if you're happy with the vanilla amphora, then that is totally fine. Don't request any customizations in that case. I'm happy to have any amphorae. But for now, let's get back to the third declension. And let's begin with some very important information about the third declension in general. And that vital point about the third declension in general is that the third declension is different to the others. And when I say the others, I mean the other 2 declensions, namely the first and second declension. Now you might think, how does it differ? Well, the third declension differs from the other 2 declensions in that nouns in the third declension do not add a set of endings to just one stem. To illustrate, here is the start of the declension of the second declension noun doulos. As I just said, this is a second declension noun, and we can see that it declines as follows. Doulos, doulon, doulou, etc. And crucially, we can see here that a set of endings is added to the stem doul. The stem doul is used throughout the declension, and then the endings os, on, ou, etc. are added on to that stem, that single stem, doul. So in the case of the second declension, we have just one stem that a set of endings is added on to. And that also applies to the first declension. A first declension noun has just one stem, and the endings are added to that stem. However, the third declension is a bit different, and we can see this by looking at the start of the declension of the masculine third declension noun, aner. Aner means man in the sense of male. And we can see that this noun, aner, declines as follows. Aner, andra, andros, etc. So what is apparent here is that in the accusative and the genitive, there is one stem that is being used, that endings are added onto, namely the stem andre. We see that used in both the accusative and the genitive. But this nominative singular form, aner, is different. It does not use the stem andre, and we are now going to find out why that is. The reason for that is because masculine and feminine third declension nouns have a unique form in the nominative singular and the vocative singular, but they use one stem with a set of endings everywhere else. So in the nominative singular and the vocative singular, they have a unique form that uses a different stem. But everywhere else in the declension, they use one stem which they attach a set of endings to. Let's see this more clearly by looking at the full declension of the noun aner. Now you don't need to note this declension down right now because we shall revisit it later in the video, but right now I'm just using it to illustrate the point that in the third declension, you don't have just one stem being used throughout the declension. Because for masculine and feminine third declension nouns, the nominative singular and vocative singular are unique forms, but everywhere else you do have one stem that a set of endings is added onto. So let's go through the declension of aner. We can see it goes aner, andra, andros, andri, aner, andres, andras, andron, andrasin. This serves to illustrate my point that in the third declension, masculine and feminine nouns have a unique nominative singular form and vocative singular form, but everywhere else they have one stem that a set of endings is added onto. So we can see in the accusative singular we have the stem andre, in the genitive singular there's the stem andre, the dative singular also has andre, and the same applies to the nominative plural, the accusative plural, the genitive plural, and the dative plural. Now in the case of the dative plural, we've got this additional alpha here, and that is because the ending sin, as we shall discuss later, causes changes to the stem that it's added onto for the purposes of euphony, that is, to make the language sound nice when pronounced, to make it easier to pronounce and nicer to pronounce. So the dative does also use the stem andre, but when you add the ending sin, we need to put this extra alpha there to make it sound nice. Because it wouldn't be nice to say andresin. You need to say andrasin. Anyway, we shall talk more about that later, but the point I'm making at the moment is that for masculine and feminine third declension nouns, the nominative singular is a unique form, the vocative singular is a unique form, but everywhere else uses one stem and a set of endings. And for aner, that stem is andre. And we call that stem that's used everywhere except the nominative singular and vocative singular for masculine and feminine third declension nouns, the oblique stem. That is the technical term for that stem that's used everywhere else. Now the label oblique stem is a bit of a misnomer because the term oblique refers to the accusative, genitive and dative cases, but the oblique stem is also used in the nominative plural. So that's one reason it's a misnomer. But it is the technical label for the stem that's used everywhere else in the declension. Now you might wonder, what do I mean exactly when I say that the nominative singular and the vocative singular are unique forms? Well, what I mean is those forms use a different stem to the rest of the declension. And we don't need to learn the stem that they use. We just need to memorize those full unique forms. So when I say they're unique, I mean that they use a different stem to the rest of the declension. But as I say, we don't have to learn that stem, we can just learn the unique form in its entirety, or the unique forms. The reason that I say unique form or unique forms in the plural is because for some third declension nouns, the vocative singular is visually identical to the nominative singular. However, for other third declension nouns, the vocative singular is a modified form of the nominative singular. And typically, it will be modified in that it has shortened a vowel in the nominative singular, as we see here with aner. The vocative singular is aner. It shortened the eta to epsilon. Alternatively, a third declension noun might shorten the nominative singular for the vocative singular form by dropping the final consonant, and we shall see that later as well. But anyway, the vocative singular form will be unique, either in that it will look the same as the unique nominative singular form, or it will be a slightly modified version of that nominative singular form. Anyway, what all this information means is that when we learn a new third declension noun, we need to learn its nominative singular form and also its oblique stem. Those two things are vital for a third declension noun, because the nominative singular form is a unique form, and we need the oblique stem because that is used in almost all of the other forms. So for instance, when we learn the noun aner, we can't just learn aner, but we also need to learn the oblique stem andre. And the way we can do that is either by learning the oblique stem individually, by taking note of it when we learn the noun, or by learning the genitive singular form. Because if we look at the genitive singular form, which we're handily given in a dictionary or word list, we can get the oblique stem from that by dropping the ending os. So to learn the oblique stem, we can either learn the oblique stem individually by taking note of it individually when we learn the noun, or we can learn the genitive singular form and just remember to drop the ending os to get the oblique stem. Anyway, let's now look at a second example of a third declension noun to illustrate this point further. And we can see that guner declines as follows. Guner, gunaika, gunaikos, gunaiki, gunai, gunaikes, gunaikos, gunaikon, gunaiksin. Now you don't need to note down this declension just yet because we shall see it later on in the video, but right now I'm just using it to illustrate the point that the nominative singular form is unique, and so is the vocative singular form. Now this is actually an exception to the rule that I just told you about how the vocative singular is typically formed. I said that it's typically a shortened version of the nominative singular. That is, when the vocative singular is in fact a modified version of the nominative singular. But be aware that there are plenty of third declension nouns where the vocative singular is visually identical to the nominative singular. But where it's a modified version of the nominative singular, it's typically modified in that it's a shortened version of the nominative singular. But here, it's actually got a diphthong rather than the long eta. So this is an exception. But typically, when it's a modified version of the nominative singular, the modification will be some kind of shortening of the nominative singular. But we can see that we've got a unique form in the nominative singular, guner, and a unique form in the vocative singular, gunai. Everywhere else, however, we have the stem gunaik, which the endings are added onto. In the dative plural, it's gynaiksin. What's happened here is we did have the oblique stem gynaik, but the sigma in the ending sin has combined with the kappa to make xi. Because kappa and sigma make the sound ks, which is the xi sound, so that's why it's gynaiksin. But literally it is gynaiksin. Meaning that all of the other forms, apart from the nominative singular and vocative singular, use the oblique stem gynaik, with the set of endings, which we shall look at more in a little while. So now we know that masculine and feminine third declension nouns have a unique nominative singular form and a unique vocative singular form, but everywhere else they use one stem, called the oblique stem, which they add a set of endings onto. What about neuter third declension nouns? Well, the situation is very similar with neuter third declension nouns, because neuter third declension nouns have a unique form in the nominative singular, accusative singular, and vocative singular, but they use one stem with a set of endings everywhere else. So it's essentially the same situation, but the accusative singular is also a unique form. And that's because, as we know, neuter words in Greek have to be visually identical in the nominative and accusative. So for a neuter noun, you can't have just the nominative singular being a unique form. The accusative singular also needs to be a unique form, because the nominative and the accusative have to look the same for neuter words. To illustrate this, here is the declension of the neuter third declension noun, pragma. Pragma means thing, matter, affair, or deed, and we can see that it declines as follows. Pragma, pragma, pragmatos, pragmati, pragmata, pragmata, pragmaton, pragmasin. Now I haven't put the vocative singular on here, and that is because the vocative singular is identical to the nominative singular. Remember that if I don't list the vocative singular, you should assume it is identical to the nominative singular. So the vocative singular, if you were ever going to address a thing, is pragma. And therefore we can see that the nominative singular is a unique form, and if it were on there, we will be able to see the vocative singular is also a unique form, because the vocative singular is also pragma, the same as the nominative singular. For neuter third declension nouns, the vocative singular will look just like the nominative singular. So the nominative singular and vocative singular are unique forms, but crucially, we also have the accusative singular as a unique form. The accusative singular is also pragma. So that's different from masculine and feminine third declension nouns. With masculine and feminine third declension nouns, it was just the nominative singular and vocative singular that were unique forms, but with neuter third declension nouns, it's the nominative singular, accusative singular, and vocative singular. So we've got the addition of the accusative singular as a unique form, since it needs to match this nominative singular form. However, everywhere else we have one stem called the oblique stem, which a set of endings is added onto. So the oblique stem of pragma is pragmat, and we can see that it's used in all other forms. And that a set of endings is added onto that oblique stem. But this ending sin has essentially caused the tau to disappear, because it sounds very awkward to say pragmatsin, so the tau has been replaced by sigma. The sigma has eaten the tau, so it's just pragmasin rather than pragmatsin. But the oblique stem was still used there. It's used everywhere with neuter third declension nouns, except the nominative singular, accusative singular, and vocative singular, because those three forms are unique forms, but everywhere else uses one stem with a set of endings. Here is another example. Here we have the neuter third declension noun, hudor. Hudor means water, and we can see that it declines as follows. Hudor, hudor, hudatos, hudati, hudata, hudata, hudaton, hudasin. So from this we can see that the nominative singular and accusative singular are unique forms, namely hudor, and if we could see the vocative singular, it would also be a unique form, namely hudor, because it will be the same as the nominative singular. So those three forms are unique, but everywhere else we have the stem hudat with a set of endings added onto it. It is there in the dative plural, but once again the sigma in the ending sin has replaced the tau at the end of the stem. So it's hudasin rather than hudatsin. And as we know, we call this stem the oblique stem. That stem that's used everywhere else apart from in the unique forms is called the oblique stem. Now we can see another reason why it's a misnomer, because like I said, the term oblique cases refers to the accusative, genitive and dative cases, but with neuter nouns, the accusative singular is a unique form. It's the same as the nominative singular form. And so the oblique stem isn't used in the accusative singular of neuter nouns. So that's another reason the term oblique stem is a misnomer. However, it is the technical label, and we can just use it for the stem that's used everywhere apart from the places where you have a unique form, which for neuter third declension nouns is everywhere except the nominative singular, accusative singular and vocative singular. Okay, with that crucial information relayed to you, we can now talk about the subgroups of the third declension. And you can see that there are 8 different subgroups in the third declension. It goes from 3a to 3h, but please don't be alarmed, okay? It's not as bad as it looks. We can draw connections between these subgroups in order to help us remember how nouns in each of these subgroups change their endings. It's not as bad as it looks, I promise you. And once you've learned the third declension, if you've also learned the other two, then you'll be able to decline every regular noun in Greek. So please do keep going, okay? Don't get demoralised. And I should mention that, as before, I got these labels for the subgroups from Jack's amazing Reading Greek course. And today we're focusing on 3a nouns and 3b nouns. And to begin by telling you about 3a nouns, well, 3a nouns have various endings in the nominative singular. That's because their nominative singular is a unique form. And that unique form for 3a nouns can have a variety of endings. But that's okay, it just means you need to learn that unique form individually. For each 3a noun that you meet, you need to remember its nominative singular form and its oblique stem, as I've already said. So, 3a nouns have various endings in the nominative singular, but in the genitive singular, they end in os. And that os is attached to the oblique stem, as I've said. And with regard to their gender, 3a nouns are either masculine, feminine, or capable of being either masculine or feminine, what we might call common gender. If a noun's capable of being either masculine or feminine, then it's a common gender noun. But the majority of 3a nouns are either masculine or feminine. Now what about 3b nouns? Well, 3b nouns have various endings in the nominative singular, but they typically end in ma in the nominative singular. So there is a typical ending that's used in the unique form of 3b nouns, and that is ma. But that's not always used, okay? They can also use a variety of endings in that unique form in the nominative singular. But 3b nouns have the genitive singular ending os, and in terms of their gender, they are all neuter. Now the question is, how would you recognise from a dictionary or a word list that a noun is a 3A noun or a 3B noun? Well, you know it's a 3A noun if its genitive singular ends in os, and it's either masculine, feminine, or capable of being either masculine or feminine. You know it's a 3B noun if its genitive singular ends in os, and it is neuter. To clarify, when I speak of the genitive singular of 3A nouns and 3B nouns ending in os, I mean os without any other vowel listed before it. This is an important clarification because there is another subgroup of the third declension, which we shall meet later on, that uses the ending uos in the genitive singular. That is upsilon, omicron, sigma. But if the genitive singular ends in os without a vowel immediately before the os, then you know it's a 3A noun or a 3B noun, and you know which of those two it is by looking at the gender. So here, in terms of recognising the subgroup, what really matters is the genitive singular ending and the gender. With the other declensions, what mattered in terms of identifying a noun subgroup is the nominative singular ending and the genitive singular ending. But for 3A nouns and 3B nouns, it's a little different in that what matters is the genitive singular ending and the gender. These are the two bits of information that we need to look at when we're determining the noun subgroup. But we do also need to take note of its nominative singular form in order to be able to fully decline that noun and recognise it when it appears in the nominative singular, or the vocative singular, or in the case of neuter nouns, the accusative singular as well. So in order to classify a noun as a 3A noun or a 3B noun, we need to look at the genitive singular ending and the gender. And the reason we need to look at the gender is because of the fact that the gender is the only thing that distinguishes a 3A noun from a 3B noun when the nominative singular does not end in ma. Because if you have a 3B noun that does not have a nominative singular ending in ma, but one of the various endings, then when you see it in a dictionary or in a word list, the only thing that distinguishes it from a 3A noun is the fact that it's neuter. Because they both end in os in the genitive singular, but it's the gender that makes the difference. In terms of identifying whether it's a 3A noun or 3B noun from a dictionary or word list, the gender is what distinguishes these two subgroups. But of course, nouns in these subgroups do decline slightly differently as well, and we shall look at that soon. But first, I would like to look at some examples of 3A nouns and then 3B nouns in their dictionary form in order to show how we would identify them as 3A nouns and 3B nouns respectively. And crucially, I'm also going to show how we can work out the oblique stem of each of these nouns from its dictionary form. Here we have the noun aner, which we have already met, and it means man in the sense of male. And we can see that we've got aner, andros, and ho. We have three bits of information. As usual, we've got the nominative singular form, and here, secondly, we've got the full genitive singular form. Now, with first and second declension nouns, they give you the genitive singular ending. But I did say that sometimes, in a dictionary, you're given the full genitive singular form. With a third declension noun, you will either be given the full genitive singular form, or you will be given the genitive singular ending, but with a bit of the oblique stem before it, in order for you to be able to work out what the oblique stem is. Either way, they will give you enough information in the genitive singular form or the genitive singular ending to let you know what the oblique stem is. Here we've got the entire genitive singular form, and then thirdly we've got the appropriate nominative singular form of the definite article. And that lets us know the noun's gender. But as I've said before, some dictionaries might have M or F or N, rather than the appropriate form of the definite article. Anyway, we would identify this as a 3a noun by noting that the genitive singular ends in os and it is a masculine noun. We know it's masculine from the fact that we've got the masculine nominative singular definite article here. So the ending os and the fact that it's masculine together let us know that it is a 3a noun. And what's absolutely crucial is that we can not only know the subgroup from this information, but we can know the oblique stem. We know that in particular from the genitive singular form. And we get that by dropping the ending os, which is the genitive singular ending for 3a nouns, which leaves us with andre. And so we know that the oblique stem of aner is andre, and that stem will be used everywhere except the nominative singular and vocative singular. Let's now look at a second example. Here we have the noun gyner, which means woman, and we can see that we've got gyner, gynaikos, and cher. We know that this is a 3a noun because the genitive singular ends in os and the noun is feminine. We know it's feminine because cher is the feminine nominative singular form of the definite article. So because of that, it must be a 3a noun. Moreover, as before, we can glean the oblique stem from the genitive singular form. So if we drop the ending os, we get the stem gynaik. So we know that the oblique stem of the noun woman, the oblique stem of gyner is gynaik. Let's now look at a third example of a 3a noun. Here is the noun παις, which means child, boy, slave, or girl. If it's masculine, then it means child, boy, or slave, and if it's feminine, then it means girl. It's one of these common gender nouns, that is to say, one of these nouns that's capable of being either masculine or feminine. Now we know that this is a 3a noun because the genitive singular ends in os, and it is capable of being either masculine or feminine. But as before, we get some other essential information about this third declension noun from these Greek forms. We know that the unique nominative singular form is παιs, and we know that the oblique stem is paid. We know that by dropping the ending os, which leaves us with the stem paid. To show you one more example, here is the noun geron, which means old man. Now we can see that the genitive singular ends in os, and it is a masculine noun, and so it must be a 3a noun. And we can glean some more essential information from these Greek forms here. Namely, we know that the unique nominative singular form is geron, and we also know that the oblique stem is geront. Here, they haven't given us the full genitive singular form. We've just been given ontos. And so we're expected to work out from that the full genitive singular form is gerontos. And so if we drop the os, then we're left with geront. We have to understand the ger bit before it. They've left it out. I said that they always give you enough information to work out the oblique stem, even if they don't always give you the full genitive singular form. So the oblique stem would be geront. Let's now look at some examples of 3b nouns in their dictionary form. Here we have the noun pragma, which means thing, matter, affair, or deed. And we know that this is a 3b noun because its genitive singular ends in os, and it is neuter. Those two bits of information tell us that it is a 3b noun. And we know other essential information from this entry, like the fact that the unique nominative singular form for this noun, which is also used in the accusative singular and the vocative singular, since this noun is neuter, is pragma. As I said, 3b nouns do typically end in ma in the nominative singular, and we see that here. And we know that the unique nominative singular / accusative singular / vocative singular form of this noun is pragma. Now, I've put the circumflex here, not because a contraction has taken place, because it hasn't, but to let you know that this is a long alpha in this unique form. So it'll be pronounced like R rather than A. Pragma. And we also have a long alpha in this genitive singular form, but it's not got a circumflex, it's got a macron. And we can see that the genitive singular form is pragmatos. So from that we know that the oblique stem is pragmat, because we just get rid of the ending os and we're left with that oblique stem. So we know that this stem would be used everywhere except the nominative singular, accusative singular and vocative singular. Let's look at a second example of a 3B noun. Here is the noun derma, which means skin. Now we're given three forms, derma, atos and to. We know it's a 3B noun from the fact that the genitive singular ends in os and the noun is neuter. That tells us it is a 3B noun. But as always with third declension nouns, we get more useful information from this entry, namely that the unique nominative singular form of this noun is derma, which would also be used in the accusative singular and vocative singular. And we're given part of the genitive singular form here. We're given a bit of the oblique stem plus the ending. And we can work out from what we're given here that the full genitive singular form would be dermatos, which means, if we get rid of the os, that the oblique stem is dermat. So you can see a pattern here. These 3B nouns that end in ma have oblique stems that end in mat. And likewise, there are patterns with how 3A nouns form their oblique stems. But you will learn those patterns through experience. Let's look at one more example of a 3B noun in its dictionary form. Here is the noun hudor, which means water. Now we can see that the genitive singular ends in os and the noun is neuter. And therefore it must be a 3B noun. And in addition, we have other useful information too, like the fact that the unique nominative singular form is hudor. And this form, hudor, would be used in the nominative singular, the accusative singular, and the vocative singular. We're given part of the genitive singular form, and that's enough to let us know that the oblique stem would be hudat, since we can work out that the full genitive singular form would be hudatos, and we can drop the ending os to get hudat. So that's how we would identify a noun as a 3A noun or a 3B noun from its dictionary form. And also how we can glean the oblique stem of a 3A noun or 3B noun from its dictionary form. I'm now going to tell you about the endings used in the third declension. Now the endings that we're about to see are the basic sets of endings for third declension nouns. However, nouns in the other subgroups, I mean subgroups other than 3A or 3B, either have a stem, an oblique stem that is, that contracts with these endings, which results in endings that look slightly different, or they modify these sets of endings in some way. And that's why there are so many subgroups in the third declension, because they either have stems that contract with these endings or they modify these endings in some way. However, 3A nouns and 3B nouns simply add these endings as they are in their basic form to their oblique stems. So these are the endings for 3A nouns and 3B nouns, and they're also the endings for other third declension nouns, but they look slightly different for the nouns in the other subgroups, either because of a contraction or because of some modification to this set of endings. Anyway, let's look at these endings now. Now for masculine and feminine nouns in the third declension, or nouns that are common gender, these are the endings that are used. We know that we've got a unique form in the nominative singular and the vocative singular that we just have to learn for each noun individually, but we do have consistent endings that are added onto the oblique stem everywhere else. And we can see that those endings are a, os, I, es, us, on, sin. So we can remember this as follows. Unique, a, os, I, unique, es, us, on, sin. And where we have an actual ending, we know that it's going to be added to the oblique stem. And as we saw earlier, this ending sin in the dative plural can cause changes to the oblique stem. And now there are rules governing those changes, but a principle that worked for me when I learned Greek is make it sound nice. When you add sin, make it sound nice. That is a principle that worked for me consistently, or at least pretty consistently. There are some exceptions. When I learned Greek. So for instance, rather than pragmatsin, we would just say pragmasin. The sigma would replace the tau. And you'll get a better feel for what happens every time sigma meets a letter through experience. But in general, making it sound nice works. Now let's look at the endings for neuter nouns in the third declension. Here we have a unique form in the nominative singular, a unique form in the accusative singular, but then we've got os and I added to the oblique stem. We've got a unique form in the vocative singular, that will be the same as these two. And then we've got in the plural the endings a, on, sin. So we've got unique, unique, os, I, unique, a, on, sin. And once again, this ending sin can cause the oblique stem to undergo some changes. Let's now look at 3A nouns in depth. As I've said, 3A nouns are masculine, feminine, or capable of being either masculine or feminine. Most of them are either masculine or feminine, rather than common gender, but there are some that are common gender. Examples include aner, which means man, guner, which means woman, pais, which means child, boy, slave, or girl, geron, which means old man, and pulax, which means guard. And as I've said, when we meet a new 3A noun, we have to take note of its nominative singular form, since that is a unique form that the vocative singular will either be the same as or a modified version of. And we also have to take note of the oblique stem, which we get from the genitive singular form by dropping the ending os. So for instance, with pulax, which means guard, we can see that its oblique stem would be pulak. Since we're given akos here, that lets us know that the full genitive singular form would be pulakos, and therefore the oblique stem would be pulak. But we would also have to note down this nominative singular form, since that is a unique form that we need to learn. Now, a fun fact for you here is that we get lots of English derivatives from the oblique stems of third declension nouns. So, for instance, the oblique stem of aner is andr. That gives us words like misandry. Misandry is the hatred of men. I'm sure you can think of other derivatives too. Please share any derivatives you think of that I do not mention in the comments below. Also, the oblique stem of guner is gunaik. Gunaik gives us words like gynecology. The oblique stem of pais is pied. Pied gives us words like paediatrician. A paediatrician is a doctor for children. Now we can occasionally see derivatives from the nominative singular form alone. So for instance, geron gives us the word geriatric. Now we said the oblique stem of pulax is pulak. And if we transliterated pulak, we would get philag. So I'm pretty sure we get anaphylactic shock from pulax. But I'm not sure what anaphylactic shock is, so I need to check, and I should check right now. I just went to pick up my phone. I'm filming this video with my phone. My case is empty. It's there. So I need to check. Using my laptop. 1 second, please. Okay, so it turns out that anaphylactic shock is where you have a severe reaction to something, it's where your body is trying to guard itself against something, but excessively so. So it is to do with guarding, and it is related to the word pulux, meaning guard. They say it comes from a different third declension noun, pulaxis, which is a guarding or protection, which is cognate with pulux. Anyway, let's go on now to learning about how 3A nouns decline. Now, you can work this out from the information that I've told you already, in that you know that the nominative singular and vocative singular forms of 3A nouns are unique. So you need to learn those individually. And you know that everywhere else in the declension, one stem, called the oblique stem, is used, and that set of endings that I showed you, for masculine and feminine third declension nouns, is added onto the oblique stem. So we can see that aner declines as follows. Aner, andra, andros, andri, aner, andres, andras, andron, andrasin. So we have to learn these two unique forms, aner and aner, individually. We have to just learn those when we learn the third declension noun. And we also have to learn the oblique stem, andre, which we get from the genitive singular form, which we're given in a word list or dictionary. But once we've learned those unique forms and the genitive singular stem, the rest is entirely predictable, because we know we've got the oblique stem, which we got from the genitive singular, everywhere else with the endings a, os, I and s, as, on, sin. So it maps onto what I said about the endings for third declension nouns that are masculine or feminine. To remind you of those endings, here they are, and we can compare them. We said that in the nominative singular, we've got a unique form, which we have here. Then the accusative singular has the oblique stem plus the ending a. The genitive singular has the oblique stem plus the ending os. The dative singular has the oblique stem plus the ending I. The vocative singular is a unique form, and it's often a modified version of the nominative singular form, and that modification typically looks like a shortening, either by shortening a vowel or by dropping the final consonant. Here we shorten the vowel eta to epsilon. Then the nominative plural uses the ending s, the accusative plural uses the ending us, the genitive plural uses the ending on, and the dative plural uses the ending sin. And sin causes some changes to the oblique stem a lot of the time. And we see one such change here. Andre has been extended to andra, because it sounds horrible if you try and say andresin. It's difficult to say, it doesn't sound nice. So we need to add in the alpha. So now I would like you to note down the declension of aner, and that will serve as your paradigm for the declension of 3A nouns. But bear in mind that the vocative singular for some 3A nouns will be identical to the nominative singular rather than a modified version of it. And bear in mind also that we do need to learn these unique forms and the oblique stem of each 3A noun individually. But this serves as a paradigm for the declension of 3A nouns, because we can see we've got a unique form in the nominative singular, a unique form in the vocative singular, and then the oblique stem plus the endings everywhere else. So please do pause the video and note down this declension. Now, just for your reference, you don't need to note these down, but you're more than welcome to pause the video at any point and do so if you wish to. Here are the declensions of other 3A nouns. I know we saw some of these at the start, but now we're looking at them with a focus on the endings and the actual declension rather than the stem change. Here we have the declension of guna. We can see it goes guna, gunaika, gunaikos, gunaiki, gunai in the vocative singular, gunaikes, gunaikas, gynaikon, gynaiksin. So, the nominative singular and vocative singular are unique, and everywhere else we have the oblique stem, gynaik, with the endings added onto it. So we've got a, os, I, es, us, on, sin, but sin here has become xin because the sigma has combined with the kappa at the end of the oblique stem. Now we haven't seen the declension of peis, but just for your reference, peis, meaning child, boy, slave or girl, declines as follows. Peis, paida, paidos, paidi, pai, paides, paidas, paidon, paisin. So, we have a unique nominative singular form and a unique vocative singular form,
version
which,
of the
as usual,
nominative singular form
is a shortened version of the nominative singular form. We've got pi when you're addressing a boy or child or slave or girl, rather than peis. But everywhere else, we have the oblique stem paid with the endings a, os, I, es, us, on, sin added onto it. The dative plural did use paid, but it sounds awkward to say paid sin, so it becomes paisin. Another example is the noun geron. Geron declines as follows. Geron, geronta, gerontos, geronti, geron, gerontes, gerontas, geronton, gerousin. Now, as expected, we have a unique nominative singular form and we have a unique vocative singular form, and this unique vocative singular form is a shortened version of the nominative singular in that instead of omega, we've got omicron. So if you're addressing an old man as old man, you would call him geron rather than geron. Anyway, we can see that the oblique stem is geront, and that is used everywhere else with the endings a, os, I, es, us, on, sin added onto it. Once again,
we did have the stem
geront in the dative plural, but something interesting has happened here, even more interesting than usual. In Greek, if you have the ending ont and you add sin to it, then you get ousin. Ont sin makes ousin, and we shall see this elsewhere in Greek later on. So bear in mind that geront sin becomes gerousin. A final example is the noun pulux. Pulux means guard, and we can see that it declines as follows. Pulux, pulaka, pulakos, pulaki, pulakes, pulakas, pulakon, pulaxin. We have a unique nominative singular form, and you can see that I haven't listed the vocative singular, and that is because it is identical to the nominative singular. So the vocative singular would also be pulux. So we have a unique form here and in the vocative singular, but everywhere else we have the oblique stem pulak with the endings a, os, I, es, us, on, sin added onto it. But in the dative plural, sin has become xin because the kappa at the end of the oblique stem has combined with the sigma at the start of the ending to make x. That is to say, xi. Now before we look at 3b nouns in depth, there's one more thing to note about 3a nouns, and that is 3a nouns that end in is in the nominative singular often have an accusative singular that ends in. You would ordinarily expect the accusative singular of a 3a noun to be the oblique stem plus alpha. But 3a nouns that end in is in the nominative singular instead often have an accusative singular that ends in. So it's like the nominative singular, but instead of ending in is, it ends in. So for example, the noun ornis, which means bird, has the genitive singular form ornitos. which means that the oblique stem is ornit. And so because of that, you would expect the accusative singular to be ornita. But the accusative singular is actually often ornin. But ornita is also used. So for the noun ornis, there is this accusative singular form ornin, but ornita does also exist. Whether the expected accusative singular form exists depends upon the particular noun. So for example, the noun charis, as far as I'm aware, only has the accusative singular charin, even though the oblique stem is charit. Other nouns ending in is in the nominative singular are the opposite. Some nouns that end in is in the nominative singular, such as patris, for example, do not have an accusative singular that ends in. So patris is patrida in the accusative singular. So just be aware that 3a nouns which end in is in the nominative singular often have an accusative singular ending in rather than an accusative singular which uses the oblique stem plus alpha. Now let's focus on 3b nouns. 3b nouns are all neuter. They are typically derived from verbs and end in ma in the nominative/accusative singular, with their oblique stem ending in mat. But they can have other endings in the nominative/accusative singular and a more unpredictable oblique stem as well. But with regard to the ending ma, that ending ma essentially makes the noun into a thing version of a verb. So for example, the noun pragma comes from the verb prator, which is the verb to do. So a pragma is a thing that is done, or in other words, a deed. So lots of these 3b nouns end in ma and are derived from verbs. Let's look at some examples. I've just mentioned the noun pragma, which means thing, matter, affair, or deed. Derma means skin. And thirdly, hudor means
water.
Now you can see that we do also get some English words from these words. So for instance, pragma has the oblique stem pragmat, and we can see from that we get words like pragmatic. Likewise, the oblique stem of derma would be dermat, and that's where we get words like dermatologist from. A dermatologist is a skin doctor. And with regard to derivatives from hudor, if we transliterate hudor, we get hydor, and if we get rid of the o, then we're left with hydr, which is where we get words like hydration from. Let's now look at the declension of pragma in order to know how 3b nouns decline. We can see that it goes as follows: pragma, pragma, pragmatos, pragmati, pragmata, pragmata, pragmaton, pragmasin. Given what I've told you, this should be entirely expected, because you have a unique form in the nominative singular, the same unique form in the accusative singular, and you would have the same unique form in the vocative singular. I haven't put it here because it's identical to the nominative singular. But everywhere else, you have the oblique stem, pragmat, with the endings that I mentioned earlier for neuter third declension nouns added on to that oblique stem. You've got os, I, a, on, sin. As a reminder of those endings that I showed you earlier, I said that you've got a unique form in the nominative and accusative singular, which we can see that we've got here. Then you've got os and I added to the oblique stem, which you can see we have here. You have a unique form in the vocative singular. I haven't put it here because it's the same as the nominative singular, so it would in fact be the same unique form. Then in the plural, you have a added onto the oblique stem, which you can see you've got here. And you've got on, sin in the genitive plural and dative plural, respectively. And you can see you've got those here as well. And you can see that the sin has caused the tau at the end of the oblique stem to disappear, because it sounds a lot nicer to say pragmasin rather than pragmatsin. But for now, please do note down the declension of pragma for it to serve as your paradigm of how 3B nouns change their endings. But do bear in mind that 3B nouns have a unique form which you need to learn for each noun in the nominative, accusative and vocative singular, and that they each have an oblique stem which you have to learn. Although, for the nouns that end in ma, the oblique stem is predictable because it will end in mat. Anyway, please do pause the video and note down this declension. To show you a second example, here is the declension of hudor, meaning water. It declines as follows: hudor, hudor, hudatos, hudati, hudata, hudata, hudaton, hudasin. We can see that we've got a unique form in the nominative and accusative singular. We would also have a unique form in the vocative singular if we could see it. As we can't see it, as I haven't listed it here, we know it's identical to the nominative singular, so it would also be hudor. But elsewhere we have the oblique stem hudat with the endings os, I, a, on, sin added onto it. The sin has caused the tau of the oblique stem to disappear. It sounds a lot nicer to say hudasin rather than hudatsin. You don't need to note down this declension unless you wish to, it's just to give you a further illustration of how 3B nouns change their endings. And this one's particularly notable because it's one of the 3B nouns that doesn't end in ma in the nominative singular. And those are few and far between, but they do exist. There are some 3B nouns that do not end in ma in the nominative singular, but they do end in os in the genitive singular, and they're neuter. And so because of the fact that they end in os and they're neuter, they're still 3B nouns, although they're not one of the typical 3B nouns that ends in ma in the nominative singular and has an oblique stem ending in mat. But let's now summarise our learning for lesson 21. It's been a long lesson, it's been an intense lesson, but I hope it's been a useful lesson. We learned that the third declension differs from the others in that third declension nouns do not use just one stem throughout their declension, but rather, if they are masculine or feminine, then they have a unique form in the nominative singular and vocative singular, but they use one stem with a set of endings everywhere else. And if they are neuter, then they have a unique form in the nominative singular, accusative singular and vocative singular, but they use one stem with a set of endings everywhere else. So third declension nouns do use a stem with a set of endings, but not in the nominative singular and the vocative singular, and if they're neuter, not in the accusative singular either, because those forms are unique forms. Elsewhere, however, you do have one stem with a set of endings. But in the first and second declension, you have just one stem with a set of endings throughout the entire declension. So that's the difference. And what this means is, when you learn a third declension noun, you have to learn the nominative singular form and the oblique stem in order to be able to fully decline it. We also learned that the third declension is composed of 8 subgroups, and we learned about the first 2 of these, namely 3A nouns and 3B nouns. In particular, we learned how to recognise whether a noun is a 3A noun or a 3B noun, and we learned how 3A nouns and 3B nouns decline. And we also learned many new nouns, which I have put on the screen for you there, organised by their subgroup and organised alphabetically within each subgroup. And you can see that the way I've listed the nouns, following reading Greek, is I've given you the nominative singular form and the oblique stem. and then the appropriate nominative singular form of the definite article, which lets you know the gender. I've given it to you like this to make the oblique stem of each third declension noun very apparent, but note that when you're out there in the wild, when you're doing Greek independently and you're using a word list or a dictionary, then you will need to glean the oblique stem from the genitive singular form that you're given as the second Greek form in a dictionary entry or in a word list. You will need to drop the ending os to work out the oblique stem, but I've given you the oblique stems here in brackets for ease of reference, and I would encourage you to learn these nouns in this form. When you learn them, learn their nominative singular form, their oblique stem, the appropriate nominative singular form of the definite article that's used with them, their meaning or meanings, and their subgroup. Those pieces of information will enable you to know virtually everything you need to know about the noun. But for now, I must say thank you very much for watching. Congratulations if you're still here, at the end of the video. Really well done. Your commitment is off the charts if you're still watching at this point in the video. And I commend you for it. And I want to say thank you for it. And thank you for all of your support. If you would like to support the channel financially, then you can go to www.buymeacoffee.com/learnancientgreek. But for now though, I must go and hydrate myself. We saw where we get the word hydrate from in this video. We get it from hydor, meaning water. I must go and hydrate myself because it's very hot right now in the UK, and I've got the windows shut to minimise background noise. I've got the windows closed, so it's very hot, and I'm in a suit. But I felt like I had to wear the jacket to be consistent, because in the first and second declension videos, I was in the jacket. So I felt like I had to continue the tradition. But anyway, it's very hot, I need to go. However, keep up the good work with the Greek. Thank you once again for your support. But for now, I must say goodbye, and I shall see you again next time.